There's a discussion worth having about what happened to David. Moon.exe makes things seem incredibly complex. There's also environmental storytelling leading us to one conclusion, while the video footage we see seems to imply another thing entirely. Let's go ahead and address some of the possibilities as to what happened to this child. So first and foremost, the tale as old as time. David runs out on the road and gets hit by a vehicle. This is at least what supposedly happens in the Pizzaplex books version of events, although personally I think there's even something slightly off about that story and the odd wording that it uses when telling it. But face value, David gets hit by a car. That's the end of that. In the game, Edwin gets angry at his lawyer for trying to convince him that David's playground isn't in a safe area. Edwin even argues so far as to say there's no regulation that says he can't have the playground there. Parent of the Year award, my gosh. He argues that he can watch David while he loads and unloads freight, and that David will be under watch at all times out there. The loading dock is 200 feet away anyway. And there's a fence, although the fence definitely doesn't surround said playground. This seems to imply that there was an accident at the loading docks and David was ran over by a vehicle that was headed this way. There's even an ominous looking shot of David dropping the ball, sort of foreshadowing this possibility happening later. The story is case closed then, right? If this wasn't FNAF, I'd be tempted to say, yeah. I still might even say yes after I'm done talking through this video, but there are some other very interesting conclusions that I want to discuss here today, as this answer doesn't completely line up with some of the other things that are told through the story. There's also a theory that the Mimic, or more specifically M1, killed David. While it was originally going to be a caretaker for him, there are a few ways it could have killed him. M1 was originally created to be a playmate for David after Fiona's passing, being able to wear fun costumes to entertain the boy, as well as being able to help out around the house full time, like a babysitter. David wants to know more of what this animatronic can dress up as, and Edwin responds with anything you want, any costume we've created. If M1 kills David, it would likely have been an accidental death. If M1 knows how to get into costumes, it's not unreasonable to think that if it's playing with David, it assumes that David will be able to do the same types of things that it itself can do. For example, crawl into a spring-lock suit. While I don't necessarily think this is what happened, I also don't think we should completely rule it out yet. This is a big stretch, but we could consider that maybe the Mimic was acting out one of the Murray character personalities for David while inside a suit, accidentally crushing David or killing him unintentionally in some manner while having the suit on. Specifically, if I were to make this theory, I'd put the idea out that the Mimic was wearing the hedgehog suit, as that's one of the characters David draws in his little hideout, but more importantly, a hedgehog mask is given to the player of the moon.exe game. As of now, I really haven't thought of many good reasons why this mask is significant, but it does seem like it could hold its own story that we don't know about yet, or haven't connected its significance to at this point. The other argument for M1 killing David is that it was indeed intentional. In the moon.exe, the sun seems to be a representation of M1, the Fiona aspect of M1 at least, and it's been heavily speculated that the owl in the game is David in some form. The owl is then implied to have been put into the oven by this sun character, which seems to point towards a more sinister death. My counters to this idea are that if David is alive at this point in the EXE game, then what is the point of the moon.exe as a whole? If David's alive during this time, we wouldn't need this whole story to exist at all yet. Unless, of course, M1 had pre-planned all of this to make David into a robot like herself, but I don't see where that would be the case. Because my other challenge to this whole idea of an evil M1 is that we see a picture of David sitting with M1 on the top of a hill, looking very happy together. It seems more likely that M1 genuinely loved David. This is very consistent with the language that M1 uses whenever talking about David. But that's just my current thought on the matter. There is a lot more that we could discuss here, but I want to cover a few more things. I've also thought that maybe M1 accidentally killed David in some sort of disagreement or misunderstanding due to the Mimic not really knowing its own strength, or even having some kind of violent episode. The different products Edwin sold to customers all malfunctioned in different ways. The magic coat rack, for example, malfunctioned and threw clothes all around the room, changing sizes as well, and making the customer worried someone would get hurt. The Stay Up Latte product also backfired, sending someone to the hospital. A dog is paralyzed by a trinket in a Murray cereal box, and so forth. It isn't out of the question then that this babysitter/friend feature had a similar malfunction and was covered up by the ever-learning Mimic. My problem with this theory, though, is that David was literally left by himself on the day of his death. So Edwin left him at the playground while M1 was baking David a cake. So both caregivers are absent, which to me means David couldn't have died from M1, unless there's like a secret part of the story that we don't know about yet. But this idea of David being left alone leads into my next theory, and honestly I can't fully take credit for this idea as I've seen it floating around with varying details on Twitter as well as YouTube. I've seen some fabulous takes by multiple people. The one I most agreed with though was one video by Candi Bunny. I don't think I'll do the video justice trying to describe it here, so instead of trying to describe that video for you here, I'm going to link it below below, and I do highly recommend you go watch it if you haven't already, as it has a lot of excellent interpretations on things that make a lot of sense. That being said, my interpretation of things is a bit different still, and so I want to go into that now. Okay, so first to dive into this, the doors of the factory are right by his playground. So David leaves the playground and goes inside, but why would he do this? And the answer is because he has a little hideaway area where he presumably would draw pictures, eat snacks, and such. A kid's dream come true. But we also know from the audio log where Edwin tells David about what M1 can do for him. David doesn't want anything to do with the Endo until he finds out it can wear fun costumes. To me, what this implies is that David really likes the characters that Edwin has contracted for people and whatnot. David clearly loves the characters that Edwin makes, and so having an area like this to hide away in this particular spot just seems perfect for this kiddo. It's got all kinds of cool pieces in it, and apparently had a gigantic moon head hanging there at one point. It seems pretty obvious that David loves everything relating to this moon character and the star little characters and whatnot. But you're probably wondering what exactly happened to David in this theory. And to answer that, there's a few things I need to discuss. One, Murray is the opposite of a safety-conscious person. I highly doubt that any of his property is up to code if he can at all get away with it. These types of dangerous scenarios that Edwin has been creating are brought up multiple times throughout the game, both in audio logs and email messages. Even Fiona is getting on him about this. He's just not a safe person. Unfortunately for Edwin, this ultimately means that his son ends up as a casualty due to Edwin's neglect of safety precautions. It's in this very room where David has his last play session before he dies. So essentially how this plays out is David gets bored at the playground. He wanders inside until he gets to his little play area. But today he decides he wants to be a little more daring. He may even be bored and in need of something fresh and new to do. So he goes to his little area in this lovely room, but after eating some snacks, he sees the giant moon hanging above, and after gazing at it, he decides he wants to play with these giant blocks that are also in the room, but pretty high up. Whether or not he climbs up here or finds access to this door over here, leading him to this area, with Tiger in hand, he somehow makes it over to the giant moon hanging there. And in an attempt to reach these blocks, David has to climb over this moon. Whether he successfully reaches the blocks or not is up to debate, but it seems likely that he at least grabbed one or two, which I'll bring up again in a minute. Anyway, the moon is poorly secured and should never have been hanging there in the first place. But since Edwin seems so opposed to any kind of safety precautions, there it rests, poorly secured, and much too heavy to be up there. The additional weight of David being on this moon causes it to break free and plummet through several stories, David unfortunately falling with it to his death. If we interpret the moon.exe story somewhat literally, the text reads that he bounced the moon, spelled his name in the stars, and ran through the snow with the silent hunter. David's ball representing the moon, his toy blocks representing spelling his name under the stars, and running through the snow with the silent hunter to be the plush tiger. So with that info, let me explain how the moon.exe ties directly into this in a very visual sense. David initially was walking around this highest area where we can see snow drawings on the wall. It's literally snow. And he's got his tiger, and they're wandering around this very high area. So with his tiger in hand, David runs through this area when he notices the giant blocks. He decides it'd be great fun to write his name in the stars, as the moon.exe story tells us. We can see the stars hanging a bit lower than the snow, and if David attempts to fiddle with these blocks, he'd likely have to cross the moon to get to these blocks. He may have even been partially successful, as we can see that some of the blocks have fallen to the ground and they're literally inside this closed off area, meaning that this was very likely part of the original incident scene's aftermath that unfolded here. The evidence hasn't been moved since the area was initially closed off. For me, it's just too coincidental to have these blocks inside of the gated off area where this tragedy occurred. But I may be interpreting things too literally there. It just makes perfect sense to me because it lines up perfectly with the moon.exe. We have David going over the moon, we have him trying to write his name, and we have the snow and his tiger all literally in this room presented visually for us. And the ball collectible being inside of this giant moon at the bottom is to connect and point us back to this idea. But I may be interpreting things too literally here. I do think that seeing all of these things physically represented in this room though, which happens to be so incredibly close to where David's little stash area is, would be an incredible coincidence if it doesn't have greater meaning. But that aside, let's move on. We also have a strange audio line where Fiona Bot tells Edwin that,
Edwin, it doesn't make sense. It's terrible, and there's no logic behind it. It happened, and you have to deal with it. You did it before. We can fix things together. I am here to help.
This could be talking about David's death being the terrible thing with no logic behind it. And if so, it almost seems like this truly could have just been an accident. Accidents never make sense, they just happen. But on the flip side, this could be like showing us that M1 doesn't understand what happened because of its limited understanding. But I don't know why that would be the case unless this is leading up to some other big reveal later on. Anyway, the other reason I can't help but think a tragic accident is what actually occurred is that the staff knows about what happened to David, as the party for him is cancelled, and while tragic, there doesn't seem to be any discussion about anything strange concerning his death in the emails, whereas Fiona's death being staged is mentioned and discussed amongst the employees. All the staff was forced to come to David's party in an email from Edwin. What's weird though is that Edwin even says for everyone to go hide to surprise David. If there's nobody else in the room with this Fiona bot and Edwin, why would he say for everyone to go hide to surprise David? Clearly the other employees were in here at the time. They were in a public room with all the employees present. Anyway, everyone would have found out what happened to David here as they were all ready for this party. So I truly do think whether it be a vehicle backing up or David going back into the building and falling down, that there was no sinister motive. It was just a tragic accident that helped to spiral this story out of control. And ultimately that is David's story as far as I can see things at this point. But what do you think? Do you think I'm just interpreting things way too literally? Do you think there's more to the story? Do you think there's something else? Do you think maybe if David fell down to the moon place, he's actually the one possessing the moon? The sleepy moon? I don't know. There's a lot of ways you can interpret this information, and to be honest, we haven't even talked about the tiger costume, which is gonna have to be a separate video because this is getting a bit lengthy. That's all I've got. Thanks for listening. Feel free to subscribe. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you. Have a fabulous day.